The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Luke. Glory to you, O Lord. Some people told Jesus about the Galileans whose blood Pilate had mingled with the blood of their sacrifices. Jesus said to them in reply, "Do you think that because these Galileans suffered in this way, they were greater sinners than all other Galileans? By no means. But I tell you, if you do not repent, you will all perish as they did. Or those 18 people who were killed when the tower at Siloam fell on them, do you think they were more guilty than everyone else who lived in Jerusalem? By no means. But I tell you, if you do not repent, you will all perish as they did." And he told them this parable. There once was a person who had a fig tree planted in his orchard, and when he came in search of fruit on it, but found none, he said to the gardener, "For 3 years now I've come in search of fruit on this fig tree, but have found none. So cut it down. Why would it exhaust the soil?" He said to him in reply, "Sir, leave it for this year also, and I shall cultivate the ground around it and fertilize it. It may bear fruit in the future. If not, you can cut it down." The Gospel of the Lord.
This past winter, I got reacquainted with a few friends that I went to graduate school with, some in Northern California and some in Southern California. And they would send me news clippings, kind of rubbing it in about this cold winter we were having here, especially in the Midwest. And one article really struck me, a place that I used to walk by every day. It was an article about the year 1875, when Elijah Hook Workman, a Missouri native, traveled from his home in Los Angeles to a harbor in San Pablo. A shipment of fig trees had arrived from Australia. The trees were part of a beautification program. At the time in Los Angeles was a small, dusty desert town. But the town elders had decided to import non-native floral to give Los Angeles almost like a postcard appearance, a veneer, to attract newcomers from the east. Southern California was going to be marketed as a botanical paradise where every familiar and exotic plant could grow. Marketing seemed to be a part of the DNA of Los Angeles. And Elijah Workman was an agriculturalist and a city councilman. He went to the harbor and he took 4 fig trees, free trees, and planted them near the city center, the land that would one day become really a part of the center of LA, a part of the El Pueblo de Los Angeles historical monument. In a way, one of the first public art pieces in Los Angeles. And this year, just a few days ago, on March 2nd, 144 years after he had planted those trees, an unusual rainy southern winter occurred. There was a festival, a line of dancers celebrating the Chinese Lantern Festival, right in front of those fig trees. And the sound of firecrackers, the sound of celebration, was in front of this historical monument in trees. And without any warning, one of the trees that Elijah Workman had planted cracked open and fell. The noise sounded like firecrackers, but the sound was really of a dying tree. The fig tree stood as a silent witness to over a century and a half almost of change in Los Angeles. It was beloved, and its death was widely covered across the country, but especially in the Los Angeles media. Workman's patience and work paid off handsomely. The reputation of the fig tree in today's gospel is not as good. The traditional name of the story found in Luke's gospel today is the parable of the barren fig tree. There is a way of reading this gospel that understands it as being about an impatient orchard grower, an impatient owner. In this reading, God is like the impatient owner, and we are the barren fig trees. The message is to produce, to repent, or to perish. Some people find great motivation in understanding God to be like that impatient orchard owner, willing to cut us down if we are not productive. I would suggest another way of reading this parable. Perhaps it would be helpful for us to rename it and call it the parable of the patient gardener. In this reading, God is not like the orchard owner. God is like the gardener. The gardener is very much like Elijah Workman, who I spoke of earlier. Both see in a young tree the potential for tremendous growth, great beauty, and productivity. Both respect the value that time plays in driving growth and productivity. Both are patient. Karl Barth, a German Protestant theologian, understood patience to be a key attribute of God. Garth wrote, saying, patience is central to God's nature. Patience is related to the freedom that God gives each of us. Divine patience is God's respect of our freedom. Patience is God's capacity to give us the time, the space to develop freely, to come to God in our own time. God's patience with us is infinite. The season days of Lent is a reminder that unlike God's patience, our time on earth is quite short and infinite. The time to renew, to repent, and reform is now. It is not hard to understand why the readings we just heard from Luke and Paul were chosen for today, the third Sunday of Lent. They illustrate a traditional Lenten theme: repent or perish. Lent is a time for the church, reminds us of God's patience and of our urgency, of our renewed conversion and acceptance of it. It is a time of urgent evaluation and course correction. As Paul says, if you think you are standing secure, take care not to fall. The church has selected readings to reinforce these themes for us. The gospel, Jesus references two events only mentioned in Luke. Pontius Pilate dispatches troops to Jerusalem to desecrate the sacrifices of religious pilgrims he understood to be anti-Roman terrorists. At another spot in Jerusalem, 18 people were killed by a tower that collapsed suddenly. Jesus expresses the radical view that these people were not killed because they were great sinners, worse than any other people. His point, reinforced by Paul, was this: here are examples of sudden, As Jesus says in another space, another place, "You fool, this very night your life could be taken from you. Unless you repent, you will all perish as they did." It is never too late to change our hearts, to feel the personal love of God who calls us his people, however time is running out. God will never run out of patience for us, never. However, we may run out of time to profit, grow, and produce from that divine patience. I hope you and I will find motivation from a patient God, a God who is personal and stronger than death. Today is a time to check and assess how well we are doing with these 40 days of Lent. Where are we in using God's patience and the Lenten practices of prayer, fasting, and works of mercy to overcome sin, to change our hearts, to stir the waters of our baptism, to experience who is kind and merciful? Our Lenten journey to the celebration of the Paschal mystery, Jesus' death and resurrection, continues. Be patient with yourselves, just as God is patient with each one of us. Let the urgency of God's patience guide you during these remaining days of this holy season of Lent.